we executed the largest fentanyl bust in the history of the U.S.
1.7 million pills, meth, and more taken off the street.
Federal agents in New York City making the largest meth bust in recent history.
3:17 p.m. on a highway in California. 120 kilograms of methamphetamine were discovered inside a refrigerated truck. A cartel-owned trucking company had been operating in secrecy for years. An underground corridor transporting over 22 tons of drugs was still active. Want to know the whole truth? Hit like, and I'll show you everything. Bakersfield, California. At 3:17 p.m. on a Tuesday at the end of the year, on the eve of the new year, on a dusty stretch of highway outside Bakersfield, a high-risk traffic checkpoint set up by federal forces was about to rip the lid off. A $2 billion nationwide smuggling operation. Cold chain freight routes were running non-stop, day and night. Freight was piling up, containers stacked in layers, refrigerated trucks stretched bumper to bumper like a steel river loaded with frozen meat, milk, vegetables, and medicine. Everything had to reach the warehouses before the market flipped into a new year. Officers signaled a large refrigerated semi-truck to pull over for a standard commercial inspection, and it was precisely in that moment, when the system was under extreme pressure, that crime hides best. The trailer was stamped with the logo of a trusted brand, Pacific Crown Logistics, a refrigerated freight company praised for its perfect delivery record. Ranked among the fastest-growing carriers in California. The driver presented a valid commercial driver's license. The paperwork looked perfect. 24 tons of frozen produce, sealed temperature logs, a clean compliance history with the Department of Transportation, DOT. The license was valid. The cargo manifest was clear. The trailer temperature was steady at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, exactly as required. It was the picture of American logistics running with flawless precision. But the K-9 unit didn't care about paperwork. By protocol, after confirming the documents, the handler walked the dog once around the container. The dog made one full pass, then stopped cold near the rear axle. It dropped into a hard sit and refused to move. Officers looked at each other. Something wasn't right. They started unloading cargo, row after row of frozen crates. Ice-cold packages stacked shoulder high. Nothing appeared. They checked the ceiling. Still nothing. Then they brought in a density scanner. What showed up on that screen changed everything. Beneath the refrigerated floor was a section thicker than standard construction. Too dense, too reinforced, too perfect. Bolts were removed, panels were pried open, and inside, hidden like a machine, was the first shock wave of the case. 120 kilograms of pure methamphetamine, vacuum sealed and stacked with industrial-level precision. Estimated black market value, over $10 million from a single truck. At that moment, California's holiday shopping frenzy was no longer just about food. This proved a cartel smuggling line had been operating openly through America's cold supply chain. And this was only the first truck. In that instant, a routine winter traffic inspection ended and a national security investigation erupted. Hit like and subscribe to dig deeper into this case. The officers did not rush, because in federal government work, the real danger isn't what you find, it's what those discoveries mean. On the shoulder of the highway, the driver stood trembling beside his truck while investigators photographed the scene. He didn't look like a criminal. He looked more like a man who had just watched his life collapse right in front of him. His hand shook as the handcuffs clicked shut. "I deliver frozen food," he kept repeating, his voice trembling. "That's all I do. I deliver frozen food." 30 minutes later, inside the interview room, his story didn't change. He had worked for Pacific Crown Logistics for 7 years. He had driven over 710,000 miles without ever being arrested for any criminal offense. He had passed every drug test, every routine inspection, every background check. He had a wife, 2 grown children, a clean record. He was an ordinary working man, one of thousands helping keep America supplied and fed. Federal agents compared his route data against the shipping records. His stops were routine. His schedule matched hundreds of other drivers. There was no indication of criminal intent. Realizing that sent a chill through the entire room. This wasn't a smuggler hiding drugs inside a truck. This was a truck designed to hide drugs from the driver himself. The compartment could only be accessed by removing specific cargo pallets in an exact sequence, a sequence no delivery driver would ever know. The floor was mounted on hydraulic supports calibrated to avoid triggering standard weight sensors. That meant only one thing. If just one trailer was built like this, then there had to be more. Dozens, even hundreds, moving every day on California highways, carrying poison hidden beneath food meant for American families. At that moment, the meth was no longer the greatest discovery. The most important discovery was the design, because what federal agents uncovered wasn't just a shipment, it was a system. And now the task force turned its attention inward, toward Pacific Crown, the polished logistics giant hiding behind this operation. How could a company like this evade federal detection for so many years? If you want to know how this corporate cover-up worked, hit like and comment "exposed," because the truth buried inside America's supply chain is far more dangerous than anyone ever imagined. By the time the meth was sealed into evidence bags, the truck itself was no longer the main focus. Because to understand how a cartel could hide 22 tons of methamphetamine in plain sight, you had to look at the fortress they had built, printed right on the side of the trailer: Pacific Crown Logistics. Records show the company had been operating for 14 years. It employed over 480 drivers, ran a fleet of nearly 260 refrigerated tractors and trailers, and held contracts with major food distribution and retail chains. The company owned a maintenance yard outside Fresno, leased cold storage near Long Beach, and had transported more than 38 million miles without ever being flagged as a high-risk operation. Everything looked tightly controlled, elite, top-tier, industry-compliant. But behind it all was a dark secret. DEA intelligence exposed the truth. Pacific Crown wasn't being manipulated or infiltrated by the cartel. It was owned by a cartel boss, a deliberate business model, carefully designed, sophisticated to the point of brutality. Next came the internal structure. Investigators found that roughly 160 trucks in the fleet were completely legitimate, running normal refrigerated routes, hauling legal freight, following clean schedules. But another group, about 80 priority trucks, operated differently. These vehicles were sent to a cartel-owned garage for modification. Mechanics installed hydraulic compartments beneath the trailer floors to conceal narcotics. In reality, it was the cover layer. And the deeper investigators went into that highway seizure, the worse it became. From call logs, schedule changes, sudden approvals with no explanation. They identified at least 17 high-level officials tied to freight oversight, warehouse zoning, and commercial compliance. Officials who intervened directly or indirectly to ensure Pacific Crown operated smoothly, quickly, and without detection. This wasn't corruption in the old sense. This was protection. They were protecting a warehouse complex near Long Beach, a facility disguised as an emergency cold storage site that had been operating quietly for 6 years. And inside that facility came the most alarming discovery of all: a reinforced underground corridor stretching more than 1,900 feet, about 580 meters, running from the warehouse to an unregistered industrial access point near the coastline. This wasn't a storm drain. This wasn't infrastructure. It was a purpose-built tunnel, large enough to move palletized cargo at industrial speed. Analysts estimated that 22 to 35 tons of narcotics could be transported through that corridor every year, without ever appearing in public port records. And it turned out, Bakersfield was only the front door. They were no longer pursuing the goal of building a trucking company. They were staring straight at a permanent smuggling gateway, buried beneath American soil, protected by silence, paperwork, and time. The agents understood the truth by now. Stopping one truck would not stop the machine. Seizing a few kilos would not collapse a supply system that had been running for years. The flow had to be cut at the source, before sunrise, while the network still believed it was untouchable. So Federal Command made the decision. This would not be a bust. This would be a shutdown. In the darkness of early morning, more than 520 federal personnel were quietly mobilized, FBI, DEA, and DHS task forces, across 2 critical zones in California, Riverside County and the Long Beach Logistics Corridor. The tunnel fed the fleet fed the cities, and the cities were being fed poison disguised as food. At exactly 4 a.m., the signal was given. Across California, the roads were still black. Streetlights reflected off steel trailers. Cold air hung low over freight yards. And on the highways, refrigerated container trucks continued rolling, drivers pushing hard to meet end-of-year deadlines, unaware that the next exit might be their last. The first stop lasted less than 80 seconds. A white refrigerated semi heading north believed it was entering a routine inspection. The driver stepped down with his paperwork in hand, still half asleep, coffee warm. Before he fully understood what was happening, he was placed in cuffs. Federal agents moved like one unit. Under crates of frozen vegetables, they discovered the compartment. Inside, 73 kilograms of methamphetamine, vacuum sealed, numbered like warehouse inventory. Then it happened again and again. By 4:18 a.m., agents had stopped 19 refrigerated trucks on major arteries leading out of Southern California. By 4:41 a.m., the number rose to 46. By 5:05 a.m., Federal Command confirmed simultaneous seizures at way stations and exit ramps across 7 counties, stretching from inland freight routes to coastal distribution corridors. But the highways were only half the battlefield. While drivers were being pulled from their cabs, another team moved with a different purpose: to strike the leadership and the infrastructure before it could disappear. In Riverside County, tactical units surrounded a quiet gated neighborhood where executives of Golden Coast Cold Chain Logistics lived in large homes. Homes paid for by compliance, delivery metrics, and spotless paperwork. At 4:22 a.m., the first breach occurred. Front doors shattered. Floodlights washed over manicured lawns. Agents stormed inside with shields raised and rifles ready. Men in dress shirts and luxury watches, who had spent years believing they were protected, were forced face down onto polished floors. Across 9 residences, agents seized burner phones, encrypted USB drives, and ledgers that didn't list groceries. They listed routes. They listed payments. They listed quantities. And as those raids unfolded, another force hit the heart of the operation: the warehouse complex near Long Beach, officially registered as secondary cold storage. At 4:36 a.m., agents breached reinforced concrete doors that were never meant to be breached. Inside, the air was freezing. Forklifts sat abandoned mid-motion. Pallets were stacked in orderly columns, shrink-wrapped like standard food shipments. But when the shrink wrap was cut, the illusion collapsed. In one section alone, investigators counted 1.8 tons of narcotics staged for inland delivery before sunrise. Packages sealed, labeled, and ready like commercial freight. Then came the tunnel. A steel hatch was found behind industrial shelving. Agents forced it open, and beneath the warehouse, buried under California soil, was a reinforced corridor stretching into darkness. It wasn't a drain. It wasn't infrastructure. It was a smuggling artery. A conveyor system ran along one side. Wheel tracks marked the concrete floor. Pallet straps lay scattered like discarded evidence of speed. The cartel hadn't built a hiding place. It built a highway underground. By 6 a.m., the numbers were already staggering. Over 11.6 tons of narcotics seized in the first hour's $146 million frozen across connected accounts. 213 suspects arrested or detained, including managers, mechanics, and route coordinators. 62 refrigerated container trailers placed under federal guard. And when the sun finally rose, the scene did not look like a routine law enforcement operation. It looked like war aftermath. Refrigerated trucks lined the shoulder in long rows, logos covered, doors sealed with evidence tape. Drivers, many clean, many confused, stood silently in the cold, watching their livelihoods collapse around them. For years, those trailers had carried frozen food, but beneath the floor, they carried addiction. That morning, the machine lost its rhythm. Phones went dark, dispatch screens froze mid-routing, encrypted networks collapsed as if someone pulled the plug on an entire shadow economy. Because this was not chaos, this was precision. This was not a raid, this was a shutdown. By the time California fully woke up, the operation was already over. Commuters drove past long rows of refrigerated trailers parked along the shoulder, silent, sealed, surrounded by federal lights. They looked normal from a distance, like every other truck America depends on. But behind those locked doors and beneath those reinforced floors was the truth the cartel never wanted revealed. The cold supply chain had been turned into a weapon. This was the part that made federal officials sick to their stomachs, because Pacific Crown Logistics wasn't just a criminal pipeline, it was a symbol. A reminder that in modern America, the most dangerous threats don't always arrive through border fences or speedboats. Sometimes they arrive through perfect paperwork, clean manifests, compliance stamps, and the same trucks delivering frozen produce to grocery stores across the country. And for years, that system worked. Not because the cartel was lucky, because someone made it easy. Investigators now understood that every layer of the operation had been designed for one purpose: to hide in plain sight. Legitimate routes masked illegal ones. Normal drivers unknowingly transported poison. Fake temperature logs, fake audits, fake safety inspections, everything was built to appear elite, professional, and American. But nothing stays buried forever. What Bakersfield exposed wasn't only a shipment, it was a message. The cartel believed it could build permanent infrastructure on U.S. soil, and nobody would dare touch it. That's why this shutdown mattered. Because by 6 a.m., the tunnel was no longer a secret passage. It was evidence. By noon, it was a national scandal. And by nightfall, federal prosecutors were already preparing RICO indictments, asset forfeiture orders, and corruption charges that would stretch far beyond California into warehouse licensing offices, freight oversight agencies, inspection chains, and hidden financial networks that had protected the operation for years. Yet even with arrests, even with seizures, even with the tunnel exposed, one question still haunted the task force. How many other corridors are still active? How many other fleets are moving right now beneath the same American logos people trust? How many other families have unknowingly brought cartel poison into their communities, hidden under the same food they place on the dinner table? Because the truth is simple. The cartel didn't just smuggle drugs. It smuggled itself into the system. And that means this case is not the end. It's the beginning. So if you want the full breakdown, who approved the permits, who signed the contracts, how the tunnel stayed invisible for 6 years, and how deep the protection network goes, then hit like, subscribe, and comment exposed right now. Because what was uncovered beneath California highways wasn't just meth, it was a map of betrayal, and we're only getting started.